We are live, sir. We're good to go.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this April 19th, 2021 called meeting of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. Prior to the start of the meeting, a quorum of at least 7 members was confirmed. Board members are reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. I now ask for a motion to approve the April 19th, 2021 agenda.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Kamnitz. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Hall. Dr. Townsend Smith?
Yes, sir. Ms. Kamnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Keenan,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers, Ms. White.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Chastain,
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor,
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell, did you join? Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes.
It's unanimous.
Motion carries. We have an agenda. Thank you, board members. I note for the record that the board will take a roll call vote on any items requiring action on this agenda. And given the fluid environment that we're in, our meeting materials have been revised this afternoon. So please refresh our website on your device in order to have access to the most current materials. Recent legislation and pending elementary and secondary emergency relief, or ESSER 3 funding considerations, necessitated today's called meeting. Continuing to address the learning and social well-being needs of our students during the summer and beyond is a top priority of this board. In fact, this summer is a critical opportunity to provide immediate academic recovery for our students, as well as laying the foundation for strategic, structural, and long-term improvement in our state's public school system. The ESSER 3 funding that our state schools and students will receive provides a unique opportunity for our state to make necessary changes to our education system to better serve all students. While we're thoughtfully using these federal funds, we look forward to partnering with the General Assembly to align state funding from our strong and resilient North Carolina economy to ensure maximum impact of all of these resources. The board looks to the superintendent and DPI staff to continue to prepare high-quality, student-centered implementation plans for the board's consideration and approval, and to effectively implement these plans, and to provide timely updates on the benefits that our students are receiving. We'll now proceed to our committee work, and I recognize Ms. Jill Kamnitz, Chair of the Student Learning and Achievement Committee. Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I share the responsibility for the work of this committee with my colleague, Dr. Olivia Oxendine. As Chair Davis just referred to, we today are dealing with Session Law 2021-7, which was recently approved by the legislature and signed by the governor and requires each of our LEAs to develop a learning recovery and enrichment program this summer. While the department and our LEAs have been anticipating this, we still have a very short time frame in which to accomplish a very large amount of work. Many thanks to those at DPI who have quickly translated the law into guidelines, and to our LEAs who I know will be doing some heavy lifting to implement summer programs that meet the needs of their students in the best possible way. I'd like to now turn it over to Dr. Michael Marr.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'd like to thank Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, Lieutenant Governor Robinson, and board members for meeting today on such short notice. We have been working for the last 2 weeks now, trying to prepare for Session Law 2021-7, which is the school extension program. And we are ready today to present the guidance documents along with our FAQ and some of the other components, required components of this legislation that we will be approving as we move forward now. So with that, we'll dig right into it, I think. So today we will cover the program requirements for the session law. We have a proposed policy change to allotment 003. We'll have some future considerations that I'll go over related to the session law, as well as a request for approval of the guidance document and the policy change. Next slide. So each LEA is required to develop a school extension plan, and charter schools are encouraged to submit a plan for K-12 learning recovery. Each LEA must submit their plan no later than 30 days prior to the conclusion of the final instructional day of the 2021 year. So the timeliness of this meeting is really important because we actually have some districts that are coming up on their 30-day window this week. So it was critical for us to try to get these documents out this week. So I'm not going to read the slide to you because you've seen the guidance, but in general, what I'll do is I'll try to go through some of the high level requirements. So the summer school program is required to be either 150 hours or 30 days of programming. Students in kindergarten through second grade must have instruction in reading and math, third grade through eighth grade, reading, math, and science. The program must include a period of physical activity for K-8, meal service, transportation, and at least one enrichment activity during the course of the day. Enrichment activities can include any number of options: art, music, sports, or other activities at the discretion of the LEA. High school students, this is a slightly different program requirement. High school students must have access to in-person instruction for the 30-day period or 150-hour period. High school students have to attend 30 days or 150 hours. The district needs to make that period of time available to them so that they can work on end of course subjects. They can have access to modules for credit recovery or they can have elective course options, which helps with both recovery and acceleration. In terms of enrollment, the LEA is required to identify at-risk students per the definition in the general statute 115C, and they are to notify parents or guardians of student eligibility. Students are not required to attend the summer school. It is voluntary and it's at the discretion of the parent. Districts are encouraged to make opportunities available for other students within space available. And what we've asked or will ask the LEAs to do is to establish a set of criteria with which they will prioritize additional students in the program. Program assessment for K-8 students. K-8 students will be evaluated using competency-based assessments and promotion and retention rates. The expectation is that all students who participate will be administered the CBE assessment at the beginning of the program and then again at the conclusion. And the Department of Public Instruction, as directed by the State Board, will make a single competency-based assessment tool available to participating PSUs. And so this is part of allotment 003, where we will be reimbursing districts for the tool of their choice. For 9-12 students, they will be evaluated using the number of students who receive credit recovery. So we've had some questions about competency-based assessment and what is a competency-based assessment. And so here's the working definition we have. A competency-based assessment is a tool that measures levels of student competence within a given standard by assessing progression through curriculum at a student's own pace. The student's demonstration of learning outcomes is considered central to the learning process, and the CBA tool will provide feedback on student performance of progress and skills gained over time. Strengths will be identified as well as areas of support. So there are a number of CBE assessments available. We, at this time, are recommending that districts use iReady. The reason for that is iReady has the largest footprint in the state based on the survey that we've recently done. It is a CBE assessment. However, districts are not required to use that particular tool. For reporting purposes, public school units will report to NCDPI, to the Office of Learning and Recovery, by October 15th. The results of their CBE assessments, the number of students who progressed to the next grade level, the number of students who were retained, and the number of students who received credit recovery. The Office of Learning and Recovery will report to the State Board of Education in December, and then to the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee on January 15th. Okay, next slide. Okay, our proposed policy change is allotment 003. This will be to provide funds for a single competency-based assessment per grade and subject for students in kindergarten through 8 that may be taken at the beginning of the program and at the conclusion of the program. And we will have that policy for your review. And future considerations. So we expect coming before you at some point this summer, we have 2 PRCs. These are funds that are part of the ESSER 2 allocations. So there's a $40 million and a $26,144 set of reserves that the department currently has that are both being held to assist public school units in their instruction summer programs. There are a number of folks who contributed to this work. Actually, yes, there are a number of folks who contributed to this work. So while the Office of Learning and Recovery is currently staffed by 2 individuals, myself and Ms. Lynn Barber, we worked with social emotional learning, Read to Achieve, competency-based education, data and research, as well as the district and regional support team. So without all of these folks, none of this work would have been possible. It truly was a team effort. And so with that, I'll answer any specific questions you might have about the summer enrichment program guidance.
Mr. Chair, this is Treasurer Falwell. Just want to be recorded as attending, excuse me.
Treasurer,
Thank
so
you, Treasurer
noted.
Falwell.
Ms. Kamnitz?
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, I was muted and didn't realize it. Dr. Marr, before we open the floor for questions, the recommendation that's being brought to the board is that we approve the guidance document, including the definition of competency-based assessment that you just read to us, as well as the policy change. If you could quickly turn to the attachments and point the board to where those specific document, the specific documents that we will be approving, if you could sort of point us to that and quickly take a look at those.
Yes, so the guidance, if we want to start with the guidance document, it is right there. Yep, that's it.
And that basically walks through the different requirements and of the bill and clarifies where needed. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And this is the actual document we'll be approving as part as the policy amendment to allotment -003.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so those 2 documents. All right, okay, this is, what are we looking at now?
This is the CBE definition.
Okay, Okay.
CBA definition, I should say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so, so fellow board members, that's what we will be voting to approve or not this afternoon. Questions for Dr. Marr?
This is Mrs. White. I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Ms. White.
Okay. Is there a difference regarding the statute that says, and the guidance that says parents or students would not be required to participate? Do you anticipate any questions from districts across our state who might allow the parent to continue to choose whether or not to program, but also might suggest that in order for the student to be promoted to the next grade, that participation would be required? So that element requiring them to participate in order to be promoted to the next grade still leaves the choice up to the parent whether or not to participate. If they choose not to participate, then the LEA and the individual school could choose to retain the student. Does that make sense?
Yes. So is that so there's two pieces to the discretion, right? So the first is the student is deemed eligible. The district would reach out to the parent. The parent could choose to enroll the student, and then upon successful completion, the district could choose to promote that student. Or the other side could happen. The student is invited to attend. The parent chooses not to attend. The student was perhaps being retained and then would subsequently be retained. Does that answer the question?
Yes, correct. I just wanted to make sure that the language would allow the school in support of with the LEA that the student could be retained if the student was invited to attend and chose not to.
Yes.
That would
Yes,
not be
and
being forced to, yeah, that requirement, that language around requirement would, yeah.
we worked very hard to stay within the framework of the legislation when we built out the guidance. So there are parts to this guidance that are pretty prescriptive in terms of the kind of 150 hours and the 30 days and things like that. But then there are pieces that are not quite so prescriptive, and we've really left those open to the discretion of the LEA. So when it was unclear, not prescriptive, the LEAs have maximum flexibility in how they design their program.
Ms. White, this is Allison Schaefer. May I make a comment, Mr. Marr?
Yes.
The bill is really designed to allow children an additional opportunity to be promoted. So the children that it is targeted to are those who are at risk of failure. So the idea is that this would hopefully allow many of the children to be promoted, but it does anticipate that it is addressed to the children who are likely to be retained in the first place. The only exception is if a child does go through kindergarten, has attended kindergarten, and goes through the program, they must be promoted. And that is an interesting exception to, but it is the only exception where children who go through the program would not be retained if they had completed kindergarten and also completed the summer program, but they are required to then operate with additional supports in first grade.
Thank you. That addresses my question. So thank you so much for the further information.
Other questions? I do have one. I noticed that the social emotional learning folks at DPI have worked with you on this. Could someone speak a little bit about how that fits into the summer programming?
Yes. So at each of the levels, K-12, the LEAs are required to provide social emotional learning supports as part of the summer enrichment program. that is essentially the line within the legislation. So how they integrate those supports are really at the discretion of the district. So we've tried to provide a number of resources inside of both the guidance documents, and then we'll be holding a technical assistance webinar with the SEL folks running that particular webinar for districts to help them as they design their SEL supports in the summer program.
Thank you, because we all know that's going to be a critical piece to getting the desired outcomes this summer for our students. Other questions? Hearing none, Chair Davis, I will hand it back to you.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. And I'd also like to share my appreciation to Dr. Marr and our entire DPI staff for quickly and effectively moving this work forward, as well as to thank the many superintendents and their teams in our districts who, while continuing to deliver instruction in increasing levels of in-person learning, have also been preparing for this additional opportunity that summer school provides. We look forward to seeing the results of this effort. We'll now proceed to our last committee of the day and recognize Vice Chair Alan Duncan, who also chairs the Business Operations Committee. Vice Chair Duncan.
Vice Chair Duncan, if you're speaking, you're muted.
Sorry, I had difficulty unmuting. Apologize. We have an item from BizOp today, which is the elementary and secondary school emergency relief budget considerations for ESSER 3 funding. As was brought up at our recent board meeting earlier this month, the Office of Learning Recovery has set up an ESSER 3 work group, which has been composed of senior staff within DPI, and the purpose is to develop funding categories for the ESSER 3 allocations. Obviously, this has been fast moving with the funding of ESSER 3 and the allocations that need to be made. The first allocations, of course, are going out to the PSUs, and that will be followed up then by allocations related to the 10% holdback. This high-level funding plan that you're about to hear about was developed in line with state board priorities, with department priorities, and with Superintendent Truitt's recently presented Operation Polaris plan. The funding categories represent a strategic approach to addressing the pandemic-related learning recovery in a number of areas that will be the subject of a PowerPoint that we're about to hear from, that will be presented by Dr. Michael Mahar again, Mr. Jamie Falconberry, and Mr. Freeburg McKinney. So I'm going to turn over to them to present the PowerPoint, make comments, and certainly open it up for any questions and thoughts we have, because this is important and we really value input. And then we will have a motion that will follow, which I'll present a recommendation for a motion to follow. So with that, let me turn it over. I believe Dr. Mahar, to you first.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, once again, thank you for your time this afternoon. So clearly it's been a really busy 2 weeks. Mr. Falconberry and Mr. McKinney are going to assist me in this one. So we'll kind of make our way through, and Jamie Freeburg, if there's anything you want to just jump right in and help out where you see fit. So if we could, we'll make our way through. So as you've heard from Vice Chair Duncan, we developed the ESSER 3 funding categories as part of an ESSER 3 team here in the agency. And we worked to ensure we were considering not only state board priorities and DPI priorities, but the kinds of programs and programs that we would want to use to help move us forward and out of the pandemic. So we'll cover some of those categories. We can talk about some future considerations related to ESSER 3 and then there'll be a request for approval of the funding categories. So to develop the plan, as you've heard, it began with the Office of Learning Recovery really kind of shepherding this process. And I began with a capacity and needs analysis by meeting with deputies, superintendents here in the agency and others to determine where we needed additional support and how we could reinforce kind of the resources we have here to help support PSUs and students throughout the state. From that, we developed an ESSER 3 work group, which includes the Office of Learning Recovery, the deputy superintendents, federal programs, school business administration, and some others. And we have drafted, most recently, we drafted some line items. We gave you earlier in the month, we talked about some big bucket categories, but we have a little more granularity for you today. And so we'll go through some of those different pieces. So first, we have a low performing district discretionary program, $19 million. This is to provide direct support to our highest need districts. We have a $50 million line for extended learning recovery after school enrichment. So again, this is related to learning recovery and extension enrichment programs. We expect these funds to be pushed towards some of the programs that happen essentially in the next academic year, based on some of what we learned from this summer, as well as some of the other evidence-based practices that will be put into place by districts to help with learning recovery and acceleration. We have a $19 million line for mastery-based programs and assessments. We're looking to develop a CBE platform to work further developing our credit by demonstrated mastery. And this will include both teacher and school leader professional development in competency-based education, competency-based assessments. Next slide. Social emotional learning resources and programs. This is a $10 million line to help build agency capacity to support public school units and students with social emotional learning. We know this is a critical piece coming out of the pandemic. We have $20 million line for the ESSERS 1, 2, and 3 Lessons Learned Expansion Fund. We would like to develop support for expanding or scaling promising practices and programs that we're able to identify through the research conducted out of the Office of Learning Recovery. Research partnerships, $2.5 million to support research partnerships to assess the impact of ESSER-related programs. So as we consider how we build out the Office of Learning Recovery, one of the things we are really going to focus on is not only identifying these promising practices, but to be able to build an evidence base and a research base so that going forward, we can actually recommend programs for continuation. So as we think about, not only the scalability of programs, but the sustainability of programs, a lot of that is focused on the kinds of data we can collect over the next 2 years to build those recommendations.
And Dr. Maher, real
yes,
quick, I
go
just
ahead.
wanted to point out that there is in the board materials an accompanying document that also gives a little bit more description. Dr. Maher's team worked hard in providing a little bit more description there. So if you wanted to use that in accompaniment with this PowerPoint, I think it would also be very helpful. Sorry about that, sir.
No, that's great. Thank you, Freebird. Thank you. So our next line is high impact tutoring. So this is probably one of the most promising practices right now that we're seeing kind of nationally is the high impact tutoring work that's happening across the country. We have some good examples here in North Carolina. I mentioned at the state board meeting earlier, Union County has a program that shows real practice. So this is a $30 million line, which would support high dosage and other evidence-based tutoring initiatives. The next is diagnostic assessments, so $12 million for the development and or deployment of diagnostic assessments for learning recovery and acceleration. This would allow us to run really both pilot programs and statewide implementation of a variety of assessments that could also contribute to the Polaris work in accountability reform. K-5 learning, this is a $22 million line to support for a common learning management system for both in-person and remote learning. One of the things we learned out of the pandemic is we need an LMS that will help with K-5 should we have to have additional time in remote. This would also provide additional support for kindergarten readiness in the science of reading. We have a line for CDE asset and efficiency management. So this is $13,750,000 and support for tracking the allocation of ESSER 3 funds. NCDPI learning recovery initiatives. So this is $5,250,000. This will help us identify high impact practices and then assist in the development of a dashboard where we can actually display. This is the other piece that I talked about, working with Dr. Stegall, essentially to build out a dashboard where we can highlight promising practices that we find throughout the state of North Carolina. CTE credentials and certifications. This is $6,500,000. Engaging students in non-traditional classroom instruction, addressing COVID-related stop out of high school students. So these are students that, you know, to some degree, those that we're having a hard time tracking, or those who perhaps stopped out of high school in March of last year and then did not return. And so essentially being able to find those students and then provide some workforce development options for them in addition to post-secondary options. $3 million line for a statewide student survey. So we'd like to run a pilot program that aligns with the assessment and accountability reform. A social emotional learning pilot. This was a biennium budget request of $250,000. And then cybersecurity, in order to address our ongoing cybersecurity threats, this is a $10 million line. Another biennium budget request, which was specifically slated for assistance with COVID-related issues, is a $75,000 line to support drivers' education. And then an unreserved fund for the State Board of Education and NCDPI, $25 million. This would be a flexible spending account to address the needs of both the department and public school units, including Title I funding for charter schools as they may arise. Future considerations. So we will have coming before you, we have a state application that we will send to the U.S. Department of Education. So it will be our plan to describe how the America Rescue Plan ESSER 3 funds will be used. So that will come to you later on this summer. We're waiting on the U.S. Department of Ed to send the template for that. We'll also ask for approval of specific programs and initiatives. So what you've been given today, as was mentioned earlier, is more of a high level look at the ways in which we are considering spending some of the ESSER 3 dollars. Within each of those categories, there will be specific asks. And so those will be brought forward to the state board for consideration as they're developed. And then lastly, there will be performance and outcomes. So my office will certainly be providing the state board with regular updates on the performance and outcomes of programs and or initiatives that are related to ESSER funding. I should mention one of the things that is not in a specific line item is there is I believe a 0.5% allocated for personnel. And what we've done is we've tried to embed some of those personnel costs. We're not looking at a 0.5% of personnel costs right now. We have built the personnel costs we believe we need into the lines that are there. So you'll see, for example, in the research partners, there are some additional funds there to hire some folks. One of the traps we didn't want to get into was hiring a number of personnel that at the expiration of the funding, we would not be able to retain personnel. So if we could invest more in capacity and programs, we think that's a better ask right now. And with that, Jamie Freebird and I will answer any questions you might have.
All right, thank you for that presentation and to add a little more information. The number of these categories or buckets where we've assigned dollars. So you might want to talk a little bit about that through the application process that you'll be bringing to the board shortly. There also is the ability to amend as things develop if there's a need to shift that money to something that looks more promising or will be more beneficial to our students. And you may want to discuss that for a moment or two.
Yes, sir. Jamie, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I'll discuss some of that. So the plan is, just so the board knows, these funds still have to get appropriated by the General Assembly, and so we're asking the board to approve these line items so that we can then go over to the General Assembly and bring them to them. And discussing with the General Assembly on these, they would like to add a provision into the law that gets appropriated similar to ESSER 2, in that if the funds in these buckets do not get spent by a certain date, then the department and the state board have the flexibility to use those funds in best practices. Or if, for instance, if tutoring, we drain that bucket because there's so much interest and good practices with the tutoring, then and there's not for the social emotional learning aspect, then we can shift those funds over. But we would wait till the date set forth by the General Assembly. Did that answer your question, Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes, I think it's helpful for the board to get that information. Let me open up for questions and comments by board members.
This is Mariah Morris. I have a question.
Please. I should have said advisors, Mariah. My apologies.
It's okay. I knew in spirit that's what you meant. I noticed a lot of great line items here that I think can really help accelerate the great work of our classroom teachers. But as the advisor for teachers, I think I would be remiss not to ask about the decision not to include additional personnel, even with the expiration date of a few years, to really help accelerate the time that students have missed in our classrooms. From what I've heard anecdotally on the field is that teachers have really been able to do great things during Plan B when they have smaller class sizes. And I think that would really be a win-win for both students and teachers when we're looking at rolling out really important literacy initiatives like Science of Reading, to really put a lot of emphasis on reducing class sizes, really K-12, and also increasing instructional assistance. And I think, to your point, Dr. Moore, of looking at the effectiveness and having money set aside to measure the effectiveness of what we do, it would be really great for future discussions if we could increase the number of teachers to reduce class sizes and then measure the effectiveness of helping students overcome that. So I guess my question, I know Freebird is on this call, and I know you've done a lot of district visits lately. Is this something you're hearing from teachers in the field?
So this might need a clarifier. So thank you, Mariah. What we're presenting here is the 10% SEA holdback, right? So this budget is about just over 200, I think $220 million. This is the 10% that DPI and the state board have access to. So we wouldn't necessarily be hiring teachers in the field. Districts receive 90% of the funding. Districts can hire personnel with their 90% allocation, and I would anticipate that a number likely will. So I think what we're trying to express is we're not hiring additional folks large scale here in the agency, but that doesn't mean districts wouldn't hire more individuals with the funds they received. I don't know if that clarification helps.
Yes, sir. I do understand that. And working in a district position, I do understand the district role in that. I guess what I'm trying to say is I think a statewide approach to that would really move the needle for when we're really trying. Just as a classroom teacher, I know what it's like to try to help students move through gaps in their learning, and the more individual attention, I always say personnel over programs. So that's one of my questions. I wasn't sure if that's something Freebird had heard in his districts and visits tour.
Thank you for that question. And absolutely, we've been hearing a lot of what you commented on, some extraordinary ways that teachers are transcending the impact of COVID. Definitely have heard the potential for added teaching assistant positions, particularly in early grades with early grade literacy. But going back to what Dr. Marr referenced is, and if you look at the supporting document in the notes, it talks about a breakdown where the holdback may be used to offer coaching support, professional development to these districts. Also potentially leadership institutes that would support our districts. And this would go along with a district regional transformation team. So I think the answer to part of your question is, throughout a lot of these initiatives, there's the opportunity to support districts, but the hiring of additional FTEs would be in the purview of our individual districts.
Other questions or comments? All right, not hearing any, let me proceed then with what the recommendation will be. As was described at the beginning of this presentation by Dr. Marr, we started with a less granular discussion about potential buckets. This is becoming a what we'll call an intermediate granular discussion about the buckets with a greater level of refinement. The recommendation then would move to granular in terms of actual adoption of programs, but not at this time. This is to identify with greater specificity what the programs would be, but not for approval of the program. So the recommendation is that the State Board of Education approve the elementary and secondary school emergency relief ESSER 3 budget considerations with the understanding that fully developed plans and other policy recommendations to support these considerations will be provided to the board for its approval as this continues to develop. So, which would include obviously the application for the funds and getting funded and getting the approvals from the adoption of the providing the funding from the legislature, that there will be more specific provisions brought to us for exactly how the funds are going to be used within the very fine direction that's being provided in terms of what we want to try to get accomplished through this process. So there will be certainly more time for specific input on specific plans as we move forward, or specific programs as we move forward. But this allows us to make a very important step to at least provide the budget considerations so that we can move forward and be very much a part of the ESSER 3 considerations with our legislators and with our education community. So with that, unless there's further comment on that, Chair Davis, I would return it to you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan, and thanks to the team for pulling this work together. Seeing that we have no items for closed session and no new business items, colleagues will now move to taking action on the two items on our action on first reading agendas. Is there any desire to remove either one of those items from our agenda for separate consideration? Okay, hearing none, I ask if there is a motion to approve the following: SLA 1 and BizOp 1.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Kamnitz. Is there a second?
I second Donna Tipton Rogers.
Second by Dr. Tipton Rogers. Any discussion on this motion? Hearing none, Dr. Townsend Smith, we call the roll to capture the vote.
Yes, sir. Ms. Kamnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers? Yes. Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Chastain?
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell?
Aye.
Lieutenant Governor?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes.
It's unanimous.
Motion carries. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you, Dr. Townsend Smith. I remind everyone that our May meeting includes our planning and work session, and I look forward to seeing as many of my colleagues, our superintendent, DPI's executive leadership, directors, and board advisors in person for this meeting as possible, masked and socially distanced. The planning and work session will occur on May 11th and 12th, with our board meeting on May 13th. Colleagues, advisors, and staff, thank you for your attention and participation in this specially called meeting. I now ask for a motion to adjourn this April 19th, 2021 called State Board of Education meeting.
So moved, Treasurer Falwell.
Motion by the treasurer. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Lieutenant Governor. Dr. Townsend Smith.
Yes, sir. Ms. Chemnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Chastain?
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell?
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes.
It's unanimous.
Motion carries. We stand adjourned. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.